Hey guys, welcome to Square 64. From today, we are starting a new series on chess openings. This is going to be a successive series, and on every Monday, a new video on chess openings will be posted. So comment below your favorite openings that you want us to cover in this series. The first opening that we are going to cover in this series is the French defense. Now this video is just an introduction to the French defense. In this video, all the main lines are going to be explained, the basic ideas are going to be explained, but I won't go into much deep analysis of the sidelines and the main lines. All of the sidelines and the variations are going to be covered separately in dedicated videos. So stay tuned for that. So without wasting any more time, let's head straight into game, set, checkmate. Before we start, let me tell you about the origin of this defense. Between 1834 and 1836, there was a correspondent match played between London and Paris. Paris chose this opening as their main defense. From there on, this opening got its name, the French defense. The French defense starts after the moves e4, e6. Here, black plays e6 to prepare the move d5 to challenge white's center. White plays d4, controlling the center, and black plays d5. Now we have reached the basic position of the French defense. In all of our variations, we are going to see this position. In this position, white often plays the move e5, expanding in the king side. This variation is called the advanced variation of the French defense because white advances the pawn to the e5 square. In this position, black's main problem is the light square bishop on c8. This bishop has no good squares to go to. This light square bishop is often the most prominent downside of the French defense for black. Black would often try to exchange this light square bishop for white's light square bishop for two reasons. One, because black has this bad bishop on c8 square. And two, because after the king is castled on the g8 square, which is a white square, if black is successful in exchanging the white square bishop, then black could undermine white's chances of attacking the g8 square very seriously. Now let's look at the pawn structure here. You can see that white has two advanced pawns gaining a lot of space in the d4 and the e5 squares. So black has to do something to find a pawn break. There are two ways to find a pawn break in this position. One, to play f6, and the other to play c5. Each of the two pawn breaks are pretty different. With the move f6, black is trying to undermine the top of white's pawn chain, and with the move c5, black is trying to hit the base of white's pawn chain. Playing c5, white is trying to weaken this d4 square, which will eventually weaken the e5 square. Now let's look at the pawn structure one more time. White's pawn chain is facing towards the king side, and black's pawn chain is facing towards the queen side. Now, it's a general rule of chess is that you expand on the side of the board towards which your pawns are facing. So naturally, white is going to expand towards the king side, and black is going to expand towards the queen side. So black plays c5, attacking d4. White plays c3, defending d4. Black plays knight to c6, attacking one more time, and white plays knight to f3, defending one more time. So as I said earlier, you can see the direction of the pawn chain here. White is going to expand on the king side, and black is going to expand on the queen side and attack on the queen side. So this was the basics of the advanced variation of the French, and now let's take a look at the next variation of the French defense. Here, instead of playing the move e5, white can play the move knight to c3 in this position. This is the Paulsen variation of the French defense. This is by far the most commonly played variation of the French. Here, black has mainly 4 responses, and we'll look at each one by turn. The most common response of black is to play bishop to b4, pinning down this knight to the king. This is called the Winawer variation of the French. For a long time, this was considered to be the most active way for black to play the French. Now, in this variation, white continues with e5. That's the pawn structure we looked at earlier. Black now immediately plays c5, seeking the d4 break. Now in this position, white can't play the move c3 because he has a knight on c3. So somehow white has to find a way to put a pawn to c3 to protect this d4 square. So white plays the move a3, and the best move is here just to take the knight, because playing the bishop to a5 is just losing the tempo. So black takes and white takes back with the b pawn. Now white has reached its goal of putting a pawn on c3 square to protect the d4, though you can argue that this is a weak position for white because white has double pawns on the c5, but that is not a really big issue here. Here black plays the move knight to e7, the most logical square for the knight to go to, because you can't develop the knight on the f6 square because the pawn guards it. White now plays the move queen to g4. This is called the poisoned pawn variation of the Winawer French. Of course, there are many sidelines that the game could transpose to from this position. I'm going to cover all of them in a separate dedicated video to the Winawer French. This is just to show you what could happen in these kinds of positions. In the poisoned pawn variation, the queen is attacking the g7 square here. There are 2 natural responses for black. One is to simply castle. Then white plays bishop to d3, developing the bishop, and black plays knight b to c6, normal game. From this position, white could also play the move queen to c7, sacrificing the g7 pawn. So white plays queen takes g7, rook to g8, attacking the queen, queen takes h7, c takes d4. Now here, white cannot capture the d4 pawn back, because if white captures the pawn on d4, black would play queen to c3, forking the king and the rook. So that's why white plays the natural developing move, which is knight to e2. Black plays knight b to c6, h4, bishop to d7, queen to d3, d crosses c3, queen crosses c3, and that's the normal position of the poisoned pawn. Here black still has the problematic light square bishop, but at least he has managed to develop it. And also black has this half open file and has a great initiative in attack. After the move knight to c3, black has another response, which is knight to f6. This is the classical variation of the French. Here white has two responses. One is to play the bishop to g5, attacking the knight. Black responses with d takes e4, knight takes e4. Black plays bishop to e7, protecting the knight. White takes the knight, and black captures with the g7 pawn. Capturing here with the dark square bishop would be dubious because you don't want to lose your dark square bishop, you need it in the attack. So you take back with the g7 pawn. And white replies with knight to f3. This is standard position. Black would now castle to the queen side, and also white would castle to the queen side, and they will have a normal game here. The other response after black plays knight to f6 is to play the move e5. White takes back the knight to the d7 square. Here black has now two options. If black wants to open the position, black would play f6. If black wants to close the position, black would play c5. Here, if black plays f6, black has to castle to the queen side, and if black plays c5, black should castle to the king side, which is more safe. So f4, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to e3, a6. Here you can see both of the sides are going forth with their plan. White is expanding on the king side and black is expanding on the queen side. Now let's go back to the move knight to c3. Black has another response here, which is d takes e4. This is called the Rubenstein variation. This is not a good way to play for black. Black loses a lot of his chances here, and the main line goes like this: knight takes e4, knight to d7, knight to f3, knight g to f6, knight takes f6 check, and knight takes f6. This is not a good way to play for black, and I would recommend you not to go forward with this line. Now let's go back to the move knight to c3. Here black has another response, which is knight to c6. This is continuing the Paulsen Mainline. This line is not very popular in the modern games now. The main line goes like this: knight to f3, knight to f6, e5, knight to e4. Now black can of course take this knight, but that is not recommended because after black recaptures, this knight is hit and black has to move the knight to a safe square now. So that was all of the variations in the knight to c3 Paulsen Mainline. So now let's go back and take a look at the other variations. In this line, after e4, a6, d4, d5, white plays the move knight to d2. The name of this variation is the Tarrasch Variation. This is by far the most challenging line in the French defense. The reason of playing knight to d2 here is to play c3 in the future if black plays c5 challenging the d4 square. Black replies with knight to f6. White plays e5 challenging the knight. Black plays knight f to d7. White plays bishop to d3, developing move. Black plays c5 challenging the d4 pawn. White defends. Black attacks it again by playing knight to c6, and white defends it again by playing knight to e2. The reason why white didn't develop the knight to the f3 square is because white wants to play f4 in the near future, and the knight on e2 not only defends the d4 square but also defends the c3 square, and it also keeps the f3 square vacant for this knight. If white plays queen to b6, then white can play knight to f3, defending this pawn once again. Here the main line is c takes d4, c takes d4, and f6. Here, white has several different responses, but for an example, let me show you the most aggressive one. Knight to f4. White offers black the center by giving up the d4 pawn. Black takes the d4 pawn with the knight. Now white plays queen to h5 check. Black cannot defend the check with the g pawn by playing g6, because knight takes g6 or even bishop takes g6. So black has the only move, which is king to e7. Now white plays e takes f6 check. Knight takes f6, knight to g6 check with the fork of rook. Here black has to take the knight, so h takes g6 and queen takes h8. So here black is down a rook for a pawn, but black has these two monster center pawns, which are enough compensation for the lost rook. So after knight to d2, black has two more responses. One of them is c5. This is the open Tarrasch. Here white takes the d5 square, queen takes, knight g to f3, c takes d4. Now here white is apparently giving up a pawn, because knight can't recapture because queen takes. But hereafter knight can pressurize the pawn, and black can also castle and eventually get the pawn back. In the last variation of the Tarrasch, after knight to d2, black simply captures the e4 pawn. White takes back with the knight. Black develops knight to d7. White plays knight to f3. Black plays knight g to f6. Knight takes knight, knight takes knight. Now this is the main line of the Tarrasch, and this is a very passive situation here, so this line is not at all popular among the modern players. So that was the main lines of the Tarrasch, and we have now the last variation, which is the exchanged French. So let's take a look at it. In the exchanged variation of the French, the e-pawns are simply exchanged. E takes d5, e takes d5, the e-pawns are exchanged. This often leads to a very boring and passive situation of the chess game, and that's why grandmasters do not actually play this opening very much. But this is Anish Giri's favorite opening, because this leads to drawn positions. But all jokes aside, Magnus Carlsen in 2017 in the Pro Chess League did actually manage to win a game playing this exchanged French. Carlsen had the white pieces and he had superior positions in the game. That's why he managed to win. I'll link the BGN in the description so you guys can check the game out. So that's it, guys. I have covered all of the main variations of the French defense here. This was just an introduction. Of course, there are many sidelines in each variation. I'll be covering all of those in separate videos dedicated to each variation. And as always, if you did find this video helpful, then hit the like button, comment below and subscribe to our channel to become a part of our awesome Square 64 community. Before we end the video, here is a cool chess puzzle for you. In this puzzle, it's black to move and it's mate in 3. So go ahead, pause the video and see if you can solve this puzzle. If you did solve this puzzle, please comment the solution in the comment section. And please guys, stay safe, stay home and keep on playing chess. Goodbye.